I met Michael at a Liberty Fund conference, and if you don't know what that is, you sit around for a couple of days reading great books with a small group of scholars, and it almost always finishes with some kind of celebratory, never-ending dinner. And at the dinner, I was sitting with Michael and a few other people, and I sort of got a little passionate, hot under the collar about some topic and just mouthed off for quite some time. After which I said to Michael, gosh, I'm sorry, I must have sounded kind of ridiculous. And he's like, actually, I was thinking, you remind me a lot of my wife. I think the two of you would get along beautifully, and our daughter is named Margarita. And I thought, oh, well, I have got to meet this Anna Moreland. Fast forward about a year, and I walk into a meeting of Catholic intellectuals at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, and meetings of Catholic intellectuals are usually low on women, especially if it's in a male seminary. So I looked around and didn't recognize anybody at all, and figured amongst all the men in black, I would, make myself comfortable next to the elderly priest that nobody seemed to want to talk to, because nobody was going anywhere near this man. So I sit down next to this elderly priest who introduced himself to me, and I'm characteristically not paying attention to his name until somebody else comes up and practically bows down and says, Archbishop Chaput, what an honor to have you. At which point I realized I must be the only person in a room who does not recognize Archbishop Chaput by sight. At that point, still nobody came anywhere near to sit next to him. Out of reverence, I guess, and I'm sitting there next to the Archbishop, and I really wanted to get up and leave because I felt so uncomfortable, but I thought that would be kind of rude, so I did not leave his side. But given that at this meeting I was next to the Archbishop the entire time, I was very well behaved in my remarks, and across from me was this passionate woman who was saying all of these really interesting things that needed to be said. And I thought, I have got to meet this woman. And I walked up, and it was none other than Anna Moreland. So that's how I met Anna, and I'm delighted to have her here, and I'm very much looking forward. We've had a lot of conversations since then, and she is a brilliant, passionate woman, a great scholar, and a great friend. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Margarita. That was a really kind introduction. I'd like to thank the Scala Foundation, the Thomistic Institute, and the Aquinas Institute for Catholic Life at Princeton for putting together this marvelous program and inviting me to come join you this afternoon. I'm not a dummy, though. I know that the post-lunch talk is a tough slot to fill, so I have some PowerPoints. I hope that once you start digesting, the PowerPoints will help. Okay, so I am a theologian by training. I'm at Villanova University, the Department of Humanities, which is a second-generation Catholic Studies program, really. We have at least one graduate here, Katie Smith. Say hi, Katie. It's a wonderful department. It is interdisciplinary, like I said, which has really given me the freedom to both teach and write outside my area of expertise. So I started writing on natural knowledge of God, and I just am publishing a book on Christianity and Islam, although Aquinas is still the center vein of that book. And now I've found myself writing this popular book called The College Guide to Adulting, How to Major in Life, with a colleague of mine at Villanova who hired me, really, Dr. Tom Smith. So I'm here to talk to you this afternoon both about the course that gave rise to this book that we're writing together. I'll just talk about the course briefly because that'll just give you a background. And then I will talk about the one chapter that's finished, which is the chapter on dating. Really, what led me to both teach this course called Shaping an Adult Life and then write, am I speaking loud enough? And then write this book is a real concern about the undergraduate students that I teach. I've been at Villanova for 15 years, and I've come to learn that teaching is a lot more about listening than it is about talking. And I've heard a lot from my students over the course of the years that has me concerned in one principal way, which is that it seems to me that a lot of what's going on in the collegiate landscape and in colleges across the country doesn't really prepare students at all for a flourishing adult life. in three major areas: work, leisure, and relationships. In relationships in particular, you can't really connect the dots between the joys and demands of a married and family life and kind of social culture in colleges around the country. So that was my segue in. So I'll give you the wide-angle view about the course, and then I'll talk about the book project and the chapter on dating. Okay. I also have to warn you that over the course of this conversation, I'm going to end up talking directly to young people, because you're really my concern. So those of you who've already made your big choices, just pretend that I'm talking about your children or a niece or a nephew or somebody young. Okay. So the course, Shaping an Adult Life, and the book, The College Guide to Adulting, are the two things I'm going to talk to you about. In the course, the three main segments, as I've mentioned: friendship, work, and leisure. The thesis of the course is that today's college radically restricts the way that students imagine, the way that students think about, and the way that students act within these three areas. So first I'll talk a little bit about who are these students that I teach. This is a quote from one of my students from the fall. "We let our fear of failure motivate everything we do. We're not worried about life after graduation. We're worried about failure after graduation." And that's really, I think, is a widely shared feeling among the students that I teach. And it does inhibit the way that they approach work, leisure, and relationships. Another student from the fall. "Freshman year, I thought the coolest thing was to get 4 hours of sleep. It showed that you were so busy all day, working, hanging out with friends, doing clubs. It was so cool that I only had time for 4 hours of sleep. Sophomore year, there was a shift. I fell seriously ill in the fall, having to take time off and drop classes. I realized that this crazy lifestyle of mine wasn't working or worth it." So many students, by the time they're seniors, have had, if not this experience, an experience similar to this. And it affects the way that they think about work. But that's not my lecture for today. I'll do that another day. And then finally, what I need to turn away from is the voice of doubt that lives in my own mind that tries to convince me that I will never find balance or peace in all of the chaos. An overwhelming number of students, and these statistics are tracked nationally, suffer from depression and anxiety, overwhelmingly so. And so they're coming into my classroom crippled by some pretty serious mental challenges and pretty serious kind of daily challenges that inhibit their flourishing both at Villanova and then in life beyond Villanova. So in this course, I talk about in each of the areas. The first day of the classroom, after I introduce them to my phone hotel, which they have to park their phone the minute they walk in into the classroom, which, by the way, after 2 years is already outdated because of the Apple Watch. So I don't know what I'm going to do next fall, quite frankly. But so I introduce them to the phone hotel, and I tell them that the work of this course is going to be, by and large, interior work. It's going to be a demanding course in a very untraditional way. Because Professor Kidd spoke about attention. The first time I taught this course, the theme of attention, unexpectedly, when you teach, you don't always know what you're doing. And this theme of attention just organically emerged over the course of the semester. So I'm trying to encourage students to develop an awareness and attention about the habits that they have already begun to cement, and their relationship to technology is one of those habits. So they start paying attention to the patterns in their lives. Then I help them develop a new vocabulary in order to expand their imagination in these areas, and to help them reform habits to cultivate virtues for a fully flourishing adult life. And I do this in the three areas. The first area, friendship. We heard about this from Professor Titus this morning. In the friendship segment, I begin with the philosophical conception of friendship and then deepen it with the theological conception of friendship. So, the good old friends of us all, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and Aquinas on Charity are the two kind of foundational works, complemented then by St. John Paul II's The Jeweler's Shop, which is a really teachable text. It's a wonderful play, and I absolutely love teaching it. So we've already been introduced with Professor Titus this morning about Aristotle on friendship. So I encourage these students to examine their friendships that they've sort of in high school and the ones that they're experiencing in college through Aristotle's typology. We talk about being social by nature. Friendship is the decision to desire the good of friends consistently, firmly, and resolutely, and to work to help that good a reality. And we talk a lot about how your real friends make you a better person. And they talk to each other about that. And it helps them to begin to reflect not just about the friends they want to keep, right, but the friends that they might want to let go of. But then we turn to Aquinas and we learn that why are we social by nature? Well, we're social by nature because we were built in the image of God, and the God that we believe in is triune, is a triune God. The God that we believe in Christianity is relationship. So it's no shock that in order for me to be fully me, I have to enter into my relationships as mother, as sister, as teacher, as friend, as cousin, as aunt, right? So we are relational by nature because we are built in God's image. And not only that, it's kind of the one key thing, but the other key thing is that in Christianity, friendship is a gift, not a given. It is because we have been loved by God that we are then called to love others. So friendship is a gift, not a given. There are deeper demands placed upon us. And this is where I draw upon Aquinas, because we love others as they're related to God. Just like I love my husband's crazy aunt. My husband does not have a crazy aunt, but I'm pretending for the moment, right? Because I love my husband's crazy aunt because as she is related to my husband, right? We love everyone as creatures of God, as being related to God, which means that we are called to love sinners and to love our own enemies. Not in a way that's ridiculous, but in a way that makes sense, in a limited and ordered way, and Aquinas helps us with that. So there's a radical conception of friendship in Christianity that we get through Aquinas. And then we end this section on friendship by reading The Jeweler's Shop together. And The Jeweler's Shop introduces us particularly to the Christological dimension of friendship, and the fact that inevitably suffering is involved in human friendship. It's integral to Christian friendship. And that we bring to our friendships and romantic relationships the baggage of our family and cultural histories. And I call The Jeweler's Shop the kind of anti-rom-com, and students really appreciate the deep realism that's at work in that play. So that's a section on friendship. Then briefly, we talk about work. We read, this is Zygmunt Bauman, who's a Polish philosopher. He's written a series of books now, but the book that I'm quoting from right now is Liquid Modernity. Terrific book, always definitely worth reading, and I teach it in this course. He kind of conceptualizes the problem for us. Work has acquired, alongside other life activities, a mainly aesthetic significance. It is expected to be gratifying by and in itself, rather than be measured by the genuine or putative effects it brings to one's brothers and sisters in humanity, or to the might of the nation and country, let alone the bliss of future generations. Hardly ever is work expected to ennoble its performers, to make them better than human beings, and rarely is it admired and praised for that reason. And so the students really hate reading Liquid Modernity, so it's not a very teachable text. But it's a very good text, and it's worth the work that I demand of them, because Bauman really puts his finger on the particular challenges of work today with a kind of have-briefcase, will-travel approach to work, the tourist approach to work as opposed to the pilgrimage. If one conceives of one's work like as a pilgrimage, not a sort of series of experiences, then it radically reshapes the way that we think about meaningful work. Dorothy Sayers, I don't know if any of you have read her detective novels, but she articulates, we read her an essay of hers called Why Work. She articulates part of the solution in this work segment, and I'll read from the PowerPoint. I ask that work should be looked upon not as a necessary drudgery to be undergone for the purpose of making money, but as a way of life in which the nature of the human person should find its proper exercise and delight, and so fulfill itself to the glory of God. That it should, in fact, be thought of as a creative activity undertaken for the love of the work itself, and that the human person, made in God's image, should make things as God makes them, for the sake of doing well, a thing that is well worth doing. We talk in this work segment about identity capital, about young people seeking to collect individual resources that they assemble over time that makes them who they are and that orients them toward meaningful work. We talk about weak ties, how a lot of the time acquaintances, people we barely know, are able to open up doors for us through brief work experiences or anything really, that we need to kind of strengthen our weak ties. And we talk with this book called Flow. I also teach it. Margarita is the one who recommended it to me. I just remembered that. We talk about achieving flow, and it gives them a vocabulary. I have them attend to kind of what's the work that they do, the homework that they do first, the work that they don't, that they can't kind of lose themselves in. And that is a key to thinking about what they want to do in the future. Because if they achieve flow in whatever they're doing, that shows them that that's something that they actually enjoy doing, that they like doing. They lose a sense of time doing it. Great, that's a great book. And then finally, in the leisure section, a lot of students, as I'll point out in a minute, are opting out of the hookup culture. But what I think is a wider epidemic on college campuses is the Netflix epidemic. So students will stop working and then just binge watch like all the seasons of Breaking Bad. I mean, it's really depressing, quite frankly. And so to kind of give them a respite from all the work and the clubs and the commitments that they have, they will literally just sort of instinctively turn on Netflix. And I'm not saying that adults don't do that too, but anyway, I do think there's a Netflix epidemic, in part because, at least at Villanova, students arrive to campus with some leisure activities that they've developed. Students arrive to campus knowing how to knit or bake or write music or listen to music even. Some students, what else do they do? They do crafts. Anyway, they come with some habits, some leisure habits that get kind of, over the course of 4 years, beaten out of them. And they end up really spending their time watching Netflix. Okay, so I use Abraham Heschel, a great 20th century Jewish thinker. He writes this great book called Sabbath. And in a word, his sort of what he puts forward in his thesis in that book is that the great gift of Judaism to the world is the sanctity of time, not the sanctity of space, not building cathedrals, but the sanctity of time. So there is a realm in time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. And we talk in this segment about leisure practices, about Sabbath practices, and we encourage students, I encourage students to start to develop or recapture Sabbath practices that they had when they were younger. We also read another great book, Patricia Hample's The Art of the Wasted Day. And they write a final paper reacting to this, responding to this book. And it's a great book, and it's part grief journal, part memoir. And she's looking back over her life, so they're able to read somebody towards the end of her life, and she's not really that old, but to them, she feels old. She writes a memoir, and they kind of from around 20 years old are able to enter into conversation with her about leisure. It's really wonderful. Okay, that was meant to be brief. So to conclude about this course, the root of this course and the root of this book is a deep Christian humanism. A fully flourishing human life is a life directed towards salvation, but the Latin root of that term salvation is salus, right? It's healing. That salus can begin here and now. We can be healed from the damage of our harmful tendencies. We can develop virtuous habits. Of course, as we learn in the jeweler's shop, that inevitably involves pain and suffering, so there's a Christological dimension to this. The cementing of these habits makes for a fully flourishing life. It's not linear. There's no 10-point plan for success, unfortunately, but it does involve beginning to pay attention to the patterns and practices of our lives and to shift attention away from the kind of outward noise and toward the inward longings within us. And it helps us begin to reform these practices. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the book that I'm writing, and in particular this chapter on dating. So we've done the wide-angle view of the students that I teach and this Shaping an Adult Life course. And now I'm going to talk to about the College Guide to Adulting. I wanted to give you a wide-angle view, though, because the three segments of the book and the course are inextricably tied, like I said: work, leisure, and relationships. Okay, so the dating chapter. College, I think, today's college campuses, college does not ask this question well. What makes for a good relationship? I think college doesn't even ask the what makes for good sex well. But we'll stick with the what makes for good relationships. College is not preparing students for lifelong relationships. And post-college, from what I hear from my friends in their 20s, it's like all Tinder all the time. It's a wasteland. It's tough. So in this chapter, Tom and I, we re-norm, as in we talk about what students think is actually going on versus what is actually going on. We rehabilitate vocabulary, and we help them begin to reform practices, and that kind of mirrors what I've already talked about in the course. So we assume that the problem is hooking up on college campuses, but a lot of students are actually opting out of the hookup culture. From a CDC recent study, from 1991 to 2015, the percentage of high school students who have had sex decreased from 54% to 41%, which is a not insignificant number, it seems to me. Even in college, many students choose to opt out of the hookup culture, and those who do participate are not as sexually active as many think. According to the CDC, only 27% of 18 to 29-year-olds nationally had more than one sexual partner in the previous year, and only 8% had 4 or more partners. So there is, of course, a minority that's engaging, let's say, in the hookup culture fiercely. But the numbers are smaller, I think, than we would anticipate. These numbers are much lower. In a recent study, a psychologist, Rich Weisbord, and his team at Harvard's Making Caring Common project asked students aged 18 to 25 to guess the percentage of young adults who had hooked up with more than one person in the past year. And their response was 52 to 54%. Now that's almost double the actual number. Statistics about what young adults really want in terms of sex might be even more startling. The same surveys found that when asked what their ideal Friday night would include, 84% of young adults chose meaningful sex in a serious relationship or an option that did not include sex. Only 16% of those surveyed chose an option that involves casual sex. In fact, over 70% of respondents, listen to this adults, over 70% of respondents reported wishing that they had received advice from their parents on some aspect of romantic relationships. Almost 40% of whom wanted advice on, quote, how to have a more mature relationship. So at least I find that adults generally, faculty certainly, and administrators for sure are shy about entering into conversations with young people in this particular area. And I'm not going to go into all the data around the relationship between drinking and hooking up, because that's kind of obvious. While the national data about how many young people are actually hooking up shows a downward trend in casual sex across college campuses, The hookup culture affects social life on campus in ways that often escape documentation in social science surveys. In other words, students can opt out of hooking up, and yet their imaginations are still shaped by that culture. In fact, opting out is actually a reaction to that culture. So hookup culture and imagination. While many recognize that hooking up and opting out are poor substitutes for an actual love life, young people often believe that there's plenty of time to straighten this out in their 20s. And so I'll hear from students, for example, oh my gosh, don't mention the word marriage, it's so far off, I have plenty of time, I really need to focus on my work, I've got to decide what major I'm going to have and minor in 10 concentrations, or what internship I'm going to do this summer and next summer and the next 5 years. That's what I need to focus on. Like the marriage and family life will somehow magically work. It'll kind of take care of itself in the future. But the reality is just the opposite. If students aren't happy with their romantic relationships in college, things won't get any better in their 20s. Actually, they'll get worse. Partly because they haven't built up any healthy habits, and partly because the supply of potential partners shrinks after graduation, right? Because on the college campus, you actually have a large number of people around your age who are living magically like right down the hall. But if students aren't flexing their relationship muscles in college, there's no reason to think that somehow they'll magically get the biceps they want later on. When at age 25 they realize they want to move away from bars and swiping and towards something real, they might not know how. Or at 28, when they realize that their fertility has peaked and they're nowhere near getting a steady boyfriend, they might look back and wish that things had been different. They need something better than the two choices on offer. They want something more than hooking up or opting out. So by way of response, we try to rebuild their vocabulary around romance and dating, and then arm them with practical strategies to change the way they walk through college. So it's time to talk about Eros in just a second. This is just, I'm running a little behind, so this is a student quote that we're going to skip. Okay. So for the ancient Greeks, Eros wasn't just about sex. It was about so much more. Erotic love is a powerful force and central to human living. But it's also hard to control and it's risky. We're creatures built for love, whether we opt out or order in. Both hooking up and opting out attempt to control a desire that is at the heart of who we are as human beings. To reduce Eros to sex is to try to control one of our deepest desires by making it into something mechanical and transactional. It's easier to pretend that our desire for love is just about sex. If that were true, all we need to do is scratch this itch once in a while and we'd be satisfied. Or we could convince ourselves that our desire for sex can be repressed and redirected into studying or exercising or working. But those who hook up and those who opt out both reduce the desire for love to the desire for sex. They're just opting for different sides of the same coin. This confusion about the relationship between love and sex is part of the reason for romantic chaos and loneliness. Examining the real desire underneath it all will help us recover what's missing from love on college campus today. Now, Plato calls Eros a divine madness. Let's take the madness part first. It's born from an encounter with something or someone you find so attractive that you momentarily forget yourself. It's madness because all your carefully laid plans suddenly fly out the window. You feel like you're going crazy because everything stable in your life is suddenly thrown upside down, etc., etc. Erotic love is a disruptor, especially of your own sense of who you are and what you thought you wanted. Think about almost every romantic comedy you've watched. There's usually a hero or a heroine who's obsessed with work, or who has given up on love, or has gotten used to playing the field. Her life is settled and she thinks she knows how to manage Eros, until the one comes along and the plot line of her life is completely disrupted. Cue the comedy and the touching resolution. This plot line is so popular because this is actually what love does to you. It forces a fundamental reevaluation of who you are and what your life is about. It feels like your old life is bursting open into a new and abundant kind of existence. People falling in love say corny things like the flowers smell better, the sun seems brighter, and food tastes better. American poet Christian Byman says this about meeting his future wife, and I'm quoting, "When I met Danielle, not only was that gray veil between me and the world ripped aside, colors aching back into things, but all the particulars of the world suddenly seemed in excess of themselves, and thus were more truly themselves. When you fall in love, you are broken open and participates in a divine kind of life. This kind of love is also ecstatic. Ecstasy comes from two Greek words that mean stand out of yourself. We find ourselves moving out of the comfortable places we inhabit with a desire to come together with the object of our affection. Now, there's clearly a sexual dimension to this, but it's more than that. An erotic attraction means that I want to know the person better so that I can love her more. And in turn, I want the object of my affection to know and love me. To know and be known, to love and be loved. We long for this kind of intimacy. We are built for this mutuality. It involves the soul in our longing for beauty, meaning, and purpose. It forces us out of ourselves and toward the knowledge and love of another person. Now, Eros is at work not just when we fall in love with somebody. There's an erotic dimension to what we do and what we long for as human beings. Yesterday, at the Witherspoon Institute lunchtime seminar, I talked about writing a paper or a physics experiment. When you're working really hard, you're knocking your head against the wall, and all of a sudden, something comes to you, and you're able to solve the problem. And you feel that resolution, you feel it in your bones, you feel it in your body, you feel it in your flesh. It's an erotic experience. It's because knowing is an erotic experience. These are all erotic moments. For Plato, Eros is a profound longing wrapped up in everything we come to know and do. It's the strong impulse that leads us out of our temptation to narcissism, to be enclosed in on ourselves and our worries and egos. Eros invites us to look beyond ourselves and into a wider world waiting to be known and loved. The key is to learn to direct this erotic longing toward people and things that will give us joy, that will make us more rather than less human. If directed appropriately, Eros is in fact a profoundly good force in human living. Eros builds cathedrals. It writes music that moves our souls. It leads us to create and connect. It makes us more of who we are, and it makes us fall in love. Eros breaks the heart open so it can love the way it's supposed to. Now that's easier said than done. If Eros is a divine kind of madness, if Eros involves this thrilling risk of learning to deal with a new sense of myself as I become more intimate with someone I'm learning to love, then figuring out who to let in, how to take the right risks, how to take things slow, when to speed things up, when to trust, how to drop my guard, what to do with misunderstanding, how to stop playing games, all that is really difficult. It requires some thought, intention, and courage. But hooking up and opting out don't help me navigate any of those problems. Practical strategies will help me work through the challenges and delights of erotic loving. Because when Cupid shoots his arrow, I'll want to be ready. That was a little corny. In a culture awash in sexual images, in our social media, in our advertising, on our TV and computer screens, a lot of people might say that the cure for what ails us is to have less erotic stuff around. Of course, porn and advertising objectify men and women, but precisely because we're awash in attempts to reduce Eros to sex, we need to fix things not by demanding less sex or sexual images, but by asking much more of erotic love. Erotic love is the deep longing to reach completion by reaching out for a union with another person who is deeply attractive. Not just physically attractive, but humanly attractive. People who can stand toe-to-toe with us as equals and help make us better versions of ourselves. We've somehow forgotten that. But we can't just settle for the realm of ideas. We also have to make that fuller Eros real by pursuing practical strategies to get real erotic love back onto college campuses. So I'm going to just quickly say, one of the metaphors that we use is this house metaphor. It was one of the problems, it seems to me, about the hookup culture is that people are trying to get to know each other in the wrong room, right? In the bedroom instead of on the front porch. So we talk a lot about what it is like to get to know somebody on the front porch, when to invite them for a meal, spending time around the dining room table, and then moving gradually into those more intimate spaces of our homes. Okay. This is going to involve a little bit of explaining. Has anybody seen this at an airport? Yes, some of you have, right? So these are new. I don't know how new, but I'd say within the last 2 years, at least, is the first time that I saw a pee station for companion animals at an airport was maybe 2 years ago. And I stopped and looked at it and thought, what the heck is this? And then I learned what it was, and it looked completely bizarre to me the first time I saw it. But now I travel a lot. I walk right past these pee stations because it's become normal in my imagination. They're like, oh yeah, at airports we've got this fake grass and these fake fire hydrants so the companion animals can go to the bathroom. You get that, right? I want students to move to create a pee station on college campuses. What I mean by that, that's a metaphor. What I mean by that is I want them to create rehabilitate, not just bring back from the 1950s, but rehabilitate a dating culture. Make something move from being weird to being normal. We can do that. We do that. These plastic water bottles, they're an anomaly now. They didn't used to be an anomaly. I remember when they were a new thing, the plastic water bottles, right? But all my students bring their own bottles to campus. That didn't just kind of start. It started with a couple people. So that's what I'm encouraging them to do. I encourage them so much that I've adopted from Carrie Cronin at BC the dating assignment in my intro theology class, which I don't have. I'll go into it in the questions and answers, but I'm worried that I'm running behind on time. I don't really even know. But anyway, okay. So in the chapter, we talk about 5 steps for rehabilitating dating on campus. Try it, define it, let it breathe, support it, and plan for it. Okay? So, try it. I've got, since I actually have the dating assignment, I have an example of a student who actually asked somebody out on a date. Here we go. My heart was beating out of my chest as I started walking to his dorm. I felt my hands start to sweat and get clammy. I was confused as to why I was so nervous to see him. We have been friends since the beginning of the school year, and I've been to his dorm room so many times. I don't know why I felt this time was any different. I nervously walked into the building and reluctantly moved toward his room. As I lifted my hand to knock on his door, I felt my arm start to shake. It took me a few seconds, but I finally worked up enough courage to knock. I stood there waiting for him to open the door, questioning the decision I made to walk over there. As I heard the door open, my heart sank into my stomach, and I immediately felt a rush of butterflies swarming inside. I wanted to run away, but instead I smiled and said hi when he saw me. So students write a version of this. One student went to the door 4 times of the prospective date before actually getting up the guts to knock on the door. There's a lot of anxiety around asking somebody out on a date because they just don't have the social script has been lost, as Carrie Cronin says. Another student says, even on a real date, I still felt like the hookup culture was interfering because both of us were so used to not dating that it left us feeling awkward and unsure. But of course, how do you go from being awkward to not being awkward? Going on dates, right? That's how you do. You develop the practice of dating, just like developing the practice of running. But maybe it's just those moments of awkwardness that build up one's relationships muscles. No pain, no gain, they say. You gain the confidence to ask someone out for a coffee date. Well, by asking someone out for a coffee date. You get the skills you need to approach someone you're interested in by approaching someone you're interested in. And you get better and better at it. If you find that the first date over coffee too awkward, then the next time you try asking somebody else out for a walk. Sometimes doing an activity together instead of sitting and staring at each other over a latte is less intimidating. You're getting to know people on the front porch where they belong at this stage of intimacy. Finally, I know this is risky. You might get hurt. You might even get shot down, and a lot of my students do, and I read about it in their papers. So I'll have okay, I'm just telling you one quick story. I had a student say, I asked a gal out on a date, and her response to me was like, "What, you want to get married?" And that's why the word date is really intimidating to use. But have the courage to use it, you young people out there. Okay. But what's happening on college campuses isn't working. We need a different model. As scary and difficult as asking someone out might be, the alternative of hooking up and opting out is worse. I'm asking students to consider whether the person they've had their eye on for the last few months is worth the risk. I'm going to skip the success story. It's really good, but I'll go back to it in the question and answers if you want that. Step 2, name it. Okay, another quick story. So at the end of last semester, students sent me an email and said, Professor Moreland, can I meet with you? I have a question about an aspect of the class. I was like, oh, okay. And comes in my office and says, and this was not a class, this was a Shaping an Adult Life class, not the class in which I actually had the dating assignment. But I talked about it, and he said, so I did it, I finally did it. I saw a gal on Friday night. Our eyes clicked across the room, and I thought, this is what she's talking about. I have to go up to her and ask for her number. So he did. He walked up to her, he asked for her number, they went out for coffee, and then they went out for dinner. And he sat in my office, looked at me, and said, now what? Like, he didn't know what to do next. He's like, I can't do another meal. I just can't sit across from her for another meal. It's too hard. So we came up with a plan, and the moving from the casual date to the actual dating takes some work, evidently. No, not evidently, I've been there too. Okay, so listening to students correct each other about how one moves from talking to hanging to becoming official makes it painfully obvious that there are no real markers in today's collegiate dating world, other than posting a photo on Instagram. And think about how much thought goes into whether or not to post that photo on Instagram. One student admits that young people don't want to commit to a relationship. Instead, and I'm quoting a student here, most people are in this talking stage where they do not have to define their relationship. Perhaps they fear rejection or fear too much pressure to be faithful. This is another student. I know people who are exclusive, meaning they can't hook up with other people, but they refuse to refer to each other as boyfriend or girlfriend. So they're not allowed to hook up with other people. And they both agreed to this, but they still refuse to say that they're dating. I've never understood this aspect of the hookup culture because there's literally no difference between dating and being exclusive, except their refusal to label it. I've never understood why people are so terrified of labeling their relationships. So step 2 is name it. Try it and then name it. Okay. Remember though, you're dating casually but with a purpose. You're flexing your relationship muscles to try to figure out the answer to one of the most important questions you'll ever ask. Whom should I love? Judge your dates by their manners. I spend a lot of time on this, but not manners in the way that normal people mean manners. I mean, manners is an outward sign of an inward disposition. Set your expectations high. Once you're ready to begin to bring your guard down, you let this person really get to know who you are, and you're ready to get to know this other person intimately, then you're ready to transition to a serious relationship. This is the point at which you have to think about whether you're ready to utter those words, I love you. When you say those words, everything changes and the stakes go way up. Here, the emotional work of dating begins really to take shape. Here, you're building actual relationship muscles that you'll take with you no matter where you end up. Here, you take on each other's joys and sorrows. But does that mean that even after you say those 3 little words, that this suddenly becomes a quasi-marital relationship? Absolutely not. That's one of the problems is that my students look around on campus and they see like hooking up, opting out, or like basically being married to each other, which is a total pain because you live in different dorm rooms. And those aren't attractive options. So, okay. Christian Byman, because you've got to let it out. Excuse me. You've got to let it breathe. Step 3, let it breathe, okay? A flourishing marriage is a couple that doesn't just turn in on themselves. These quasi-marital relationships are headed toward a marital disaster because they're not open out to other people. If your relationship is closed in on itself too tightly, you'll smother it and each other. One student admits that during I'm quoting the student here, during an already stressful time in a young adult's life, the added pressure to maintain and cultivate a long-standing fruitful relationship can be taxing. Yes, of course it does, but that's adult living. Relationships needn't become all-absorbing. In fact, if exclusive dating entails ignoring your friends, you're setting yourself up for a suffocating marriage. Sorry, I already said that. Christian Byman writes, poet, The great paradox of love, and not just romantic love, is that a closer focus may go hand in hand with a broadened scope. To turn from anything to one face, writes Elizabeth Bowen, is to find oneself face to face with everything. In a serious relationship, you'll want to come to know the person as she truly is, and you want to let that person in to get to know you without any risks, without having to wear any of the masks that we always wear. This is scary, but it's also liberating. Here, you are actually preparing yourself for the challenges and joys of a happy, lifelong partnership, where the love and friendship between the partners moves outward. Step 4, support it. So once you begin to develop the practice of casual dating, you become a dating ambassador. Your own dating successes will encourage others to do the same. You'll surround yourself with a group of people that are choosing something different, and this will make this new alternative a possibility for others. Remember when some people started bringing their own water bottles? We already talked about that. Many of my students come from unhappy households. So they have really good reasons to fear dating. But the thing is that healthy dating is like healthy everything else. If you see other people doing it well, you want to start doing it yourself. And so you do, and then you become a concrete model of that for others. This is how change happens. This is how the water ball thing happens. This is how the pee station thing happens, incrementally. You have to surround yourself with people who will understand and support the kinds of choices you want to make. And yet this doesn't mean you should abandon your friends who are making other choices. This is a really important message. In fact, you should be courageous enough to speak up if your friends are making choices that are damaging and destructive. Too many students are afraid to speak up when their friends have developed addictions, whether to alcohol, drugs, or casual sex. Too many stand by until the problems have caused permanent damage. Healthy casual dating works best when it's nurtured by a wide web of healthy friendships. It just takes a few friends to get this started. Think of other initiatives that have taken off on campus. Final step, plan it. So my students plan for absolutely everything else in their life except for this. But maybe a little planning is called for in the dating world. When you start to get more serious, take the time to have a plan for your date that includes a strategy for things like physical intimacy you're comfortable with at this point in your relationship, how you're going to handle the who pays question, what you're willing to share now, strategies for things like how you respond if you're invited back to the dorm room, how much you'll allow yourself to drink, what you're going to do if the date goes bad, what your limits are if the date goes better, etc., etc., etc. Okay, conclusion. These are the 5 steps in case you're taking notes. Try it, define it, let it breathe, support it, and plan for it. So statistics reveal what kind of choices college students typically make when they get older, and the results may surprise you. Most adults want to get married. Most college graduates in particular will get married, and most will stay married. Teaching and talking to my students about dating and relationships year in and year out, I understand that there are good reasons for them to worry about getting married. It might seem like more and more people are shying away from thinking about how to create their own families. But just as we learned that hooking up is much less common than when you might have initially thought, the rumors about the death of marriage, I think, have been greatly exaggerated. At least in the folks that are going to college. Dating in college is important. So to the young people among us today, I say date casually, take them slowly, enjoy another person's company without being burdened by overly ambitious expectations early on. Don't ask for too little either. Don't settle for the emptiness of a hookup or the loneliness of opting out. Instead, date with a purpose. This means not dating so casually that you forget that what you're actually trying to do, which is to find someone to love who will love you back. This means not confusing casual dating with casual sex. While you're having fun dating, start to figure out what qualities you're looking for in a partner. Learn to navigate intimacy. Find out who you want to love and how to get good at learning how to love. There is no better time than now. Erotic love is a dynamic process that carries us out of our narrow narcissism into an encounter with another person. It's not a movement from selfishness to altruism. It's a movement from self-enclosure to a decision to care for the good of the person you love the most. This movement fundamentally changes us and makes us more human. We are built for relationships. It's written into the fabric of who we are. I have become more human, more uniquely me as I've entered into my own relationships. And there's more. This movement into love is always issues in abundance. It moves beyond the narrow self to new ways of being. Love is fertile. It blossoms in unexpected ways. That college relationship can heal a deeply held wound. It can give hope to a roommate who has only witnessed broken relationships. It can give you the courage to take that career risk. My college boyfriend, he would never expect that I would bring him up in a lecture. Here we go. My college boyfriend made me a better writer. I became more ambitious, and I learned to not accept initial rejections as the final word. I also came to believe in myself more because he believed in me. The fruits of this relationship are still with me, even though he isn't. This kind of love is fertile, socially, culturally, but physically too. It's what creates new life. Eros is a multiplier. Trust it, hope in it, be brave for it. Thank you.